All right, sophomores, sorry about that. Splitting the video up into two parts. Hopefully, this one works this time. So, I'm going to pick up where I left off. Go team. The topic I was talking about was alliances, and I'm showing this map. This map is from the U.S. Army. It's one of my favorite maps of the entire year, mostly because they spelled Spain that way. Yeah, that's kind of awkward. So the alliance system looks like this. So you have, we're going to erase the thing around Spain. So within the alliance system, you have two sets of countries that work on defending one another. The situation in 1914 sounds like this. The Austro-Hungarian Empire has control here over Serbia, and Serbia is pushing for independence. This is an example of ethnic nationalism, and they are supported in their quest for ethnic nationalism by Russia. So, what ends up happening is a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. He kills the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a guy named Franz Ferdinand, and in retaliation, the Austro-Hungarian Empire threatens to attack Serbia. The system that ends up getting set up is this. The Austro-Hungarian Empire threatens Serbia. Russia agrees to defend Serbia. So the fighting's not quite going to start like this, but the threats go like this. Austria-Hungary threatens Serbia, which means that Russia says, well, then we're going to come back and attack you. Germany says, if Austria-Hungary is getting attacked, they have a defensive alliance to start attacking Russia. But once Germany is attacking Russia, that means that France is going to then attack Germany because France has an alliance with Russia. So that's how the initial set of declarations of war starts, and we're just going to erase all this stuff here. The That's how the alliance system brings all of the countries into war. So we'll look at, in a little more detail about how this happens in reality. So here's another map with a little more clarity, and what I want to point out is that Germany is in a little bit of a bad spot in Europe because Germany has an enemy here in France and an enemy here in Russia who can attack on either side and attack Germany from the left and the right. This is not good for Germany. And so the solution is the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan sounds like this. This was developed in 1905, and the initial battle plan is to go from Germany, attack France, and then circle back around and attack Russia. And the rationale for this is that France was the most pressing short-term threat. The Russian military, because most of it's up here, has to get mobilized and will take a while to get to the border with Germany. So the thought was that they could attack France and make it back in time to defeat Germany. So here's the Schlieffen Plan. Developed in 1905 by, you guessed it, Schlieffen. Mr. Schlieffen, I can't remember his first name, was a military general in Germany, and he came up with the idea or the plan for launching an attack to prevent a two-front war. So the problem that Germany's trying to fix is having to deal with fighting France and Russia simultaneously and having to split their military in half in order to do that. So they come up with this insanely organized plan where the railroads were timed down to the minute. Once they said go, it was just like all trains were going and they were going to attack. And the idea was that Germany couldn't attack France directly because the bulk of the French forces were here along the border with Germany. So Germany knows that if they attack in this way, they're going to hit the bulk of the French forces. So the solution that Schlieffen came up with is to follow all these maroon lines and attack around the French defenses, come in behind the French defenses and surprise them, and then they'd be in position to knock out the French forces here, circle back around that way, and attack Russia. And this was going to be totally awesome, except for one thing. It doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work, and you'll notice this on the set of arrows that we have established here, is that the Schlieffen Plan requires Germany to attack through Belgium, that they have to avoid the French army that's right here, so they attack through Belgium. Their plan, and I'm not kidding, their plan was just to pay Belgium $2 million and say, look, we'll give you $2 million. We're not going to attack you. Just let us drive all of our trains through your country so we can attack France. And Belgium's like, no, thank you. So Belgium resists. And this is the reason why the Schlieffen Plan doesn't work, is that the Belgian military decides to fight back against Germany, and they're relatively successful, more so than anyone thought they would be. The other problem is that Britain, who we only get like a little tiny piece of right over here, but we can go back a slide if we go here, right? So the problem here for Germany is that Belgium is here, and Great Britain has a defensive alliance with Belgium, which means if Belgium gets attacked, then Britain is drawn into the war. Germany knew this, and Germany still attacked Belgium knowing that Britain was going to be involved in the war. So Germany attacks with the Schlieffen Plan. They attempt to attack Belgium. The Belgians resist. The Germans take longer than is needed or longer than was planned to get through Belgium. Britain becomes involved, and the German army ends up fighting along the in this area in eastern France on the French-German border, this area in here, which is going to be called the Western Front. And this is where the trenches become dug in the series of battles where the militaries of the Central Powers and the Allies start fighting in each other and killing each other with no real winner for several years. So here's the map of all of the fighting that goes on the Western Front, which you can see here. And you can see the line south of Belgium where you have the control going back and forth between Britain and France on the one side and then Germany on the other side. And then you have two other sets of battles. You have this massive fighting going on the Eastern Front, which is initially Germany launching a set of attacks on Russia, and they do pretty well, except they keep attacking into the winter, which is a bad mistake to make in Russia because it snows all the time. So that's one problem. You also have a set of battles that's going on with the failing Ottoman Empire, and you have Britain, which had already had influence in Egypt, launches a set of attacks, the Ottoman Empire here, and there's a big battle that takes place that I'll talk about in the next video called Gallipoli, which is right there, right by Constantinople. And so this is one argument for why World War I is both a European war to a certain extent, is also a global war. It's certainly the bulk of the fighting goes on in Europe, and the bulk of the topics that we talked about are on the Western Front. But then you also have fighting that's going on the Eastern Front, the Ottoman Empire, and we haven't even got yet to Africa or to Asia. So here's another map that shows the British advances into and trying to defeat the Ottoman Empire. You have Britain aligning itself with the Arab resistance against the Ottoman Empire. The person T.E. Lawrence, a British army official, is known as Lawrence of Arabia, works with the indigenous Arabs at the time to try to overthrow the Ottoman Empire, and he's going to end up coming up at the end of the war. He'll speak at the Paris Peace Conference that we'll have next Monday. Then you have the fighting in Africa, and there are a couple things I want to point out about the fighting in Africa. The first one is Africans serve in colonial armies outside of Africa. It's more than 100,000 Africans work to fight outside of Africa during World War I. So there's not just fighting in Africa, there's also fighting outside of Africa by Africans. India is similar in the sense that Britain conscripts or drafts Indians to fight for the British Army as well. You also have fighting going on in Africa, and you can see here the bulk of the fighting is between British possessions, so like Rhodesia here and British East Africa here, and then northern southern Nigeria here, you have British possessions fighting German possessions in South Africa as well. So you really have an extension of the World War going on in the colonies, where the British officials in their colonies are fighting against the German officials in the colonies, and the soldiers that are fighting are typically the Africans in those colonies. They adopt a total war strategy, a scorched earth policy where casualties are very high. They'll basically attack anything that has military significance. This fighting is just as brutal and just as ugly as the fighting that's going on in Europe. It gets much less publicity, which I think there's a certain sociological argument here that because it's in Africa and because it's a set of colonies and it's not in Europe, we probably pay less attention to it than what's going on in the Western Front. But you do have fighting going on in Africa, and you also have, at the end of World War I, you have the consolidation of empires. You do not have the elimination of empires in Africa at the end of World War I. What you have is German Southwest Africa, German East Africa, and Cameroon become taken up by France and Britain, and they become larger colonies for those countries. So the map of Africa only changes in that Germany loses its colonies and they're replaced by Britain and France, but Africa remains a European colonial dominated area until after World War II. So here we have the fighting in the Pacific theater, and I'll talk about this actually in a separate video again relatively soon, but because we do have to talk in more detail than I have time for in this one video to talk about the relationship between Japan and China in World War I. So I'm actually going to stop right here, and we'll come back and pick up with this map in a couple days once we can get through more of the content. I hope you had a good time watching this video. I wasn't able to come out and emerge from behind any pillars for this one, but as I mentioned in one of the two classes today, I did record myself stepping out from behind the pillar and walking towards the camera to be able to give a lecture on a topic we're not going to end up talking about. I will find a way to get that footage from my Mac onto one of these videos that I'm making with the PC and embarrass myself thoroughly. That's it for today. Have a good time. See you guys again soon.